And we're live. Welcome to another episode of the Spone Trained Personal Development Podcast. This one, I am streaming live on Facebook. It's been a while since I've done that. So if you're listening on iTunes, you can check it out on Facebook or YouTube as well. I have a beautiful beach behind me in the middle of January. So hope you guys had an amazing new year. I'm going to do a post, maybe a podcast about goal setting and accomplishing your goals and why most people don't. So get ready for that. But today, we're going to talk about something completely different. We're going to talk about the invisible cause of your internal barriers. What's stopping you? What's slowing you down? And it's something that you don't even know is happening. So I'm really excited. I got a lot of content around this today. One of my favorite topics. So we're going to dive into that in just a moment. And I want to let you guys know that over the holiday, I was a little bit behind on posting some podcasts. I didn't hit my 2 a week like usual. And the reason is because I wasn't in a state that I could resonate with the ideas that I share. So remember, just like we're a radio station, we're an antenna attracting different vibrations. And from a lower vibe, your capabilities are decreased. So your state determines your capabilities. Now, when I'm not in the state that I'm in right now, if I'm in a lower state, a lower vibrational state, a lower mood, I have trouble relating to my content because I don't resonate with it, right? So I know all the stuff that I've learned, but it's not something that flows through me that I'm in tune with because of my vibration. So it's only when I step into those higher states of being that I can access all of my information, all of my stories, and all of my emotion. And so today we're going to get into a little bit about how to do that for you guys, how to change that internal state. And there's many ways to do it, but today we're going to focus on changing the limiting voice in your head, right? That limiting voice that creates the self-sabotage, that puts barriers up around us. We're talking about why we have it, where it comes from, and how to shift it. And I'm going to tell you a few stories about how I've done that for myself and how some of my, some of my coaching clients or some of my peers, I've helped them do that as well. So if you guys haven't listened to episode 39 yet, definitely go check that out. That's where I outline my antenna theory, all of the variables that affect our state. When I say state, I mean our emotional state, our mood, our vibrational state, because our state is directly proportional to our capabilities. So if you're an athlete, if you're a speaker, if you're a leader, the state you show up in will determine your success in everything, whether it's a sales call, a negotiation, going to the grocery store. If you go in a stressed out state, you're going to be putting all kinds of sugary foods in your cart. Everything you do is dependent on your state. And so a lot of my content is around managing your state, stepping into those powerful states of love, of gratitude, of confidence. And you know that we use that by using our body, by the people we spend time with, by the way we eat. And today's episode is going to be around that internal voice, the internal dialogue that we have. Let me see. I have one person viewing. My buddy Trent is on right now. So again, if you haven't joined my Facebook page, check out Nicholas Spone, or my Facebook group, #SponeTrained, and get the latest content. So let's dive right in today. Now, some people have a weird thing about like trying to control their emotions. So I have friends that think that you have to like sit with these negative emotions and experience them and explore them. And to some degree, I agree. I can't disagree with that. But to an extent, we also have power over our emotions. Most of us don't realize we have power over our emotions. We don't exercise that power, and we don't have an intention to shape it. But today, I'm going to give you a little bit of that power back. So one of the quickest ways that we lose state is by this voice in our head. Now, Bandler and Grinder, the founders of NLP, say that 99% of depression is caused by people making pictures and hearing their internal dialogue in a way that makes them depressed. So I'll give you all kinds of examples in this episode, but basically that voice is always running in your head. And we're going to talk about where it comes from, whose it is, and how to shift it. And the way to step back into your power is to just change that voice. So I'm going to give you a couple tools to do that. You definitely want to stay till the end for that. We're going to talk about how to recognize that voice. We're going to talk about how to overcome it and really give you that power back. It's an ongoing thing. It doesn't go away, right? That voice is always going to be there. It's part of human nature. And frankly, it keeps you alive to some extent. It's a survival mechanism to limit you so that you play small, so you're more likely to survive. And a lot of purpose of the voice comes from when we were cavemen, thousands of years ago, and it's not serving us anymore. So we're going to move past all of that stuff with a couple little tweaks. I'm super excited to share some of that stuff with you today. So we're going to have four easy ways to step into emotional freedom, to step into confidence, and to step into your power. Now, I did a recording on my YouTube channel, and it's called The Internal Voice Reframe. And so it's a little hypnosis recording to help you recognize that internal voice and to shift out of it. So if you haven't, get subscribed to my YouTube channel, check that recording out. It's pretty powerful, but today we're going to go over the basics of that. So when you listen to that recording, you'll know exactly what you're doing. Okay. So, and you guys can always reach out to me with podcast ideas if there's something specific that you want to hear. Now, some of this content, some of this idea for this internal voice, for shifting it came from, let's call it a meditation experience. I was in a ceremony, and I had this experience where I realized, like visually, it appeared to me I was in an altered state, a trance state, and it appeared to me that there were all of these walls between me and where I wanted to go. And it was like I understood that the language that I use, the words that I say externally, the words I speak, and the words that I think in my head create these barriers, right? And these barriers appeared as images to me, like real barriers, because that's how they appear visually to us as well in the unconscious. So if you think about this goal that you want, a lot of times you may not realize it, but you create a picture of that goal. You may put it far off in the distance, and then your mind might put a wall up. So your unconscious knows that there's a wall, that there's, this metaphor of a wall is an actual barrier for you to accomplish your goals. And our language puts that there. So most of the time we don't consciously control our language. We have that internal voice going. It's telling us stories, right? Most of it inherited, that puts barriers all around us. And so the idea is that once we gain control of that, we can speak and change the visions that we have, and the barriers start to come down, and your unconscious mind relates to challenges and to goals and to people and relationships. It relates to it differently. And guess what? That changes the way that you feel. So I wonder if he's still on. I had a friend of mine that came over the other day, and he said, I've been doing really well. And then last night I was laying in bed and I just had all these thoughts of doubt, and I was feeling like I couldn't accomplish my goals and I wasn't good enough. And I reminded him, and he's familiar with my content, I reminded him, like, hey man, that's just your internal voice. That's you tuned into a radio station, quote unquote radio station, into a vibe that doesn't serve you. And remember, those thoughts are not you. You wouldn't get into your car and turn on your radio station in your vehicle and hear a crummy song and take that on as your identity. You would recognize that you can change the channel, right? And it's the same way with this internal voice. This is one of the most powerful triggers for our state, is the way that we talk to ourselves. And most of us have it going on in the background and we're not conscious of it. So just sit with this idea and really own it, that you control the station that you are tuned into. And you can sing a different song anytime you want, just like that. Just like you can push the dial on your radio, go to another station. You can do that with your thoughts and feelings as well. So if you repeat something often enough, or even once, and it's strongly anchored, your body will feel that, right? So if I say I'm not good enough, even if I feel like I'm good enough, pretty soon it'll bring my energy down. If I say that often enough, I'll believe it. My cells will hear that. It'll change my state. Just like if I say I'm powerful, I'm confident, this is the power of incantations, right? It's shifting into those powerful states of being by just using our language. Now, the problem is most of the time, this voice, this internal voice, is below conscious awareness. We're not aware of the way we talk to ourselves. Where it's like we're having a conversation with somebody else and we don't recognize this isn't our voice. This isn't us. We don't have to feel the way this voice tells us to feel. We can laugh at it. We can push it away. We can push it off into the distance. We can do what I do is called reframing it, right? So that we don't feel that. So often we come to a situation, our brain says, hey, you can't do this. We start to feel like we can't do it. Then we feel insecure, we get anxiety, and we back off. And we're like, man, every time I go to do this thing, I can't I can't own myself. Well, the fastest way to change it is to change the words that you say to yourself. So, and that's when you hit the edge of a comfort zone, that's what's going to happen. That voice is going to come up. And again, sometimes it's your safety mechanism to keep you alive, right? When we go to speak in public, it says, hey, I'm going to give you anxiety because I don't want you to do this, because if you mess up, you're going to get kicked out of our tribe and you're going to die. And so all the cells in your body start to take on this resonance of anxiety, which was meant to be a protective mechanism. And it does it because your unconscious is speaking to you in a way that makes you feel that way. So instead, we'll go over a couple mechanisms in a moment to teach you how to step through that. But I want you to recognize that that's what happens with the internal voice. So then what happens? You go speak, you're nervous, you're anxious, you get through it. Remember, you don't have access to all of your capabilities, but then you start to get comfortable with it. This is why it's so important to constantly push your comfort zone. So you go speak to a little group, you get nervous, anxious, you're not very good. You do it a couple times and you get comfortable. Your comfort zone has expanded. Next time you go to speak to a couple hundred people, and guess what? You still have that anxiety, but you push through it. And then next time, again, that voice gets weaker and weaker. And so then you go speak to big crowds. And every time you're pushing your comfort zone, you should hear that voice that tells you to stop. But you don't have to listen to it. That's what I'm telling you today. I want you all to recognize you don't have to listen to that internal voice. You can let that internal voice go. And so Sarah, since I'm doing this one live, Sarah says, does that apply to changing our physical body and pain or injury and illness? Absolutely. So you have an internal dialogue that tells you how your physical body should look, that tells you what that pain means, where it comes from, that tells you to avoid things. And so changing your belief comes from changing your internal dialogue. So every morning when I do my incantations, I have one that says, every cell in my body is healthy. Every cell in my body is well. I even tell people that I identify as a 24-year-old. I believe that my physical body stopped aging at 24. And people still ask me how old I am. I'm 33, but because I believe it, maybe it matters, maybe it doesn't, but I identify as a 24-year-old. My body's not aging, and I believe that. I speak it to myself over and over so many times that I just believe that I've stopped the aging process. And my body so far is responding pretty well to it. So your beliefs and the way that you speak to yourself definitely shows up in your physiology and in your health as well. All right, where was I? So just remember, you are not that voice. Every time you hit that comfort zone, that voice should say, hey, don't do this. Be careful. Don't do this. And then you can laugh at it and you can change it. You can use your voice to override it so intensely that your body doesn't feel that doubt, that anxiety and depression, whatever it might be. You can literally talk yourself into a new state of being. I'll share in a moment how a buddy of mine just did that I was on a call with last night, and it was really inspiring to see how fast he did it. But he's been practicing it. So, this is something that's a lifelong pursuit, and the quality of your life is dependent on the way that you talk to yourself. Next thing, I want you to recognize that internal voice is like a rudder, and it steers the ship. Remember, the rudder is small in comparison to how big a ship is, but without that rudder, you have no direction. And most of us are being blown around like a ship at sea in a storm without a rudder because we don't know how to manage that rudder. We don't know how to steer using our voice, using our language, and our internal dialogue. So remember that analogy. And remember that we act emotionally and we justify with logic. So if your internal voice tells you something and you feel it, you're going to act congruently with that feeling. You're not going to act in a way, unless you have developed this willpower where you can push through that and you're conscious of it, and there's different strategies to do that. Some of them we'll talk about today. But if your internal dialogue makes you feel fear, you're going to act according to that fear, right? And you're going to justify it with logic. We don't act logically, we act emotionally. And so if you don't control the emotional state you're in, right? Because our state is our capabilities. I keep saying that, I know. But that's the way it works. So I'm excited today. I hope you guys can hear that in my voice because this is so important. So secret number one is that voice is not you. I've done sessions with clients, hypnosis sessions where I tell them to tune into that limiting voice. And they're like, oh, that's my dad's voice. That's my mom's voice. It's my brother's voice. That's my teacher's voice. And it's not even their voice. Like they hear it like it was their teacher in first grade telling them they couldn't do something. And how ridiculous is it that we don't even recognize that this voice that's talking to us isn't ours, right? Sometimes it is ours. Sometimes it's keeping us safe. Sometimes it's a pattern from somebody else. So recognize that, just like a station, and change that station. Okay, so the next point, so the first step is to become the observer, right? And this shows up in so many things I talk about a lot of in my episodes, but to become the observer of that voice. And it's really just a conscious intention to be aware of it. One of the most important things you do in meditation is to watch that voice, to train yourself to hear that voice, right? And most people say, well, I can't meditate because all I do is get distracted and my mind's always talking. Well, that's amazingly powerful. Even if you can't get to the point where you're shutting off that voice, just to be aware of hearing it and how ridiculous it is, right? If you go sit in meditation, you'll start to relax and that voice will go, what are you doing? You have stuff to do. You can't do this. And you'll start to notice and just observe that voice and how that voice changes how it makes you feel. Because throughout the day, you're going to come back. You're going to say, well, I'm feeling stressed out. Why am I feeling stressed out? And then you're going to listen for that voice and it's going to say, you got 100 things to do. You got to keep going. You might get fired from your job. Your kids are doing this. And then you can just talk to that voice or change that voice from that position. But it always comes from being the observer of your thoughts. And, the last few months, maybe the last few years, as I've stepped into being able to manage my state, my time to change my capabilities, my time that it takes me to change my emotional vibrational state is literally minutes now, sometimes seconds, because that's what happens when you develop these skills and this awareness. So it used to take me, I'd be in a funk for a week or two and I'd have to go to another event to come out of it. And I wasn't aware of the variables, more specifically the way I talk to myself. And so yesterday I have all this chatter about I can't do this and it's not going to work out and I have this problem in my life and that makes me feel not good enough. But because I've observed, I've meditated, I've trained myself to listen for that voice, I just watch it and I go, oh, that's interesting. That's not me. Like, that's not my voice. Yeah, I feel it in my body for a moment because that's the way we're programmed as humans to respond to that fear response. It's meant to keep us safe, but I don't stay there because I don't have to, because I immediately do the steps we're going to talk about next, which is to change that voice. So step one is to recognize that voice isn't you. Step two is to become the observer of that voice. And most importantly, not to judge it. So I talk about this a lot with my buddy, Chris Crawford, who was, I think, my first podcast guest. And he calls it the double fuck. So we're screwed because, excuse my language, we're screwed because that voice talks to us and puts us down. But then we're screwed even more when we judge and resist that voice. Because remember, what we resist persists. So that voice is going to keep coming back. And remember also that you can't influence when you're judging. So one of the things that I'm real big on is building rapport with your unconscious mind, having a great relationship with that part of you that manages all of these processes that go on. And so I talk to my unconscious mind just like it's a person. And if you're judging it, you will lose the ability to influence it. Think about people that, they want to quit drinking and they go have a drink. And then what do? They judge themselves and then they go on a binge, right? Instead of saying, oh, that's interesting. Watching the urges, watching the action like an observer, not judging it, knowing that it's human nature, knowing that you're in the middle of growing past it, and then changing the dialogue about it, right? And so that's how you build that relationship with the unconscious. And so you can stay as the observer of that internal dialogue. Let's see here. Let's see if we have any comments. Freddie Jacquin just liked my video. I don't know if it's the same one. And so, he's one of the world's top hypnotherapists. He was a guest on my podcast. And I believe that hypnosis, and he actually talked about this in that episode. You might want to go check it out. He's got a segment on how he heard his mom's voice telling him he was awesome. And he heard his dad's voice telling him that, he wasn't good enough, that he couldn't do it. Right. And so he had these two voices battling in his head all the time. And when his dad was talking, he would feel like he wasn't good enough. But when his mom was talking, he would feel great. So in self-hypnosis, he just turned down that limiting voice from his dad and just imagine, and he literally would reach out and turn the dial up on the volume for the encouraging voice of his mother. And so you get to pick which voice you listen to. I'm sure for most of you, this is the first time you're hearing this concept. But if you don't pick the right voice, guess what's going to happen? You're going to feel depressed. You're going to feel anxious, and you're not going to know why. Remember, like the Native American proverb, there's two wolves, the wolf of fear and the wolf of confidence. And whichever one you feed is going to survive. So imagine that when you're using that voice of yours, which part of you are you feeding, the confident part or the insecure part? Okay, so you are not the voice. Become the observer of it and do not judge the voice. And then now we're going to go over 4 ways that we can shift that voice. So this is the meat and potatoes, what you guys all came for, how to get rid of that limiting voice in your head. First of all, know that it's probably going to be around in some capacity, especially if you're an achiever and you're hitting your comfort zone all the time. There's going to be a voice that tries to slow you down. So to blast through that, here's a couple strategies I have for you. First of all, you know my radio theory, my antenna theory of emotions, and you know that there's more variables than just the voice that affects our state. So if we change all those other variables, like if we change our body language from being low to standing tall, to breathing deeply, to moving quickly, right? The body language is one of the fastest way. If we change our state with our body, our internal dialogue will change as well, because the vibration in our system will be such that we don't resonate with the limiting patterns anymore. We only resonate with the empowering patterns. So the way we talk to ourselves in an empowered state will shift, right? If we change what we focus on, if we change the visions in our mind, we change our body, the people we spend time with, that limiting voice will start to go away. The higher your vibration, the less of the limiting voice that you're going to hear. And likewise, remember, everything is this feedback loop. The more empowering your voice is, the higher your vibe will be. So if you want to change your vibe, you want to change your state, talk to yourself in a certain way. But if you change your state, that internal voice will change as well. So I hope that makes sense. So you can change all the other factors, starting with your body, and your internal voice will start to change. So that's one way. Another way is to do incantations. So incantations are the way that we talk to ourselves. Now, I noticed that, with me, I have just patterns that come up that I'm like, oh, like you can't do this. You're not going to build this business. You're not going to be able to speak well. And what I do is I just constantly repeat incantations or affirmations over and over until it drowns that out. If you guys have watched the video I have on YouTube about running a marathon without training, that's what I did the entire marathon. There's a pacer they put with your group. And so I'm running with this pace group and there's 5 or 6 of us. And, the pacer would be like, oh, this hill up here, it's one of the hardest on the course. This is one of the toughest parts. And he would say these things that were meant to warn people, to give them a heads up. But what would happen is it would prove to be a limit, right? We would put a barrier in our mind. And so what I did instead to the group is I would say, I feel amazing. I feel so good. Don't you guys feel great? And we would sing that Matthew Wilder song, Break My Stride, Nobody Gonna Hold Me Down. We would sing that throughout the marathon. And it put us in an amazing state. One of the guys I was running with had his best time by a long shot. I obviously had my best time since it was my first one. But we all felt so good running this marathon because I managed the internal and external voice and language of the entire group. So constantly, you have to be aware of this and constantly, have affirmations put into place. I have one from Tony Robbins I borrow anytime I'm feeling scarcity, and I just say to myself, and I say it out loud if I'm alone. Remember the modality of volume, so I say it as loud as I can to drown out that voice. And I say, God's wealth is circulating in my life. God's wealth flows to me in avalanches of abundance. All my needs, desires, and goals are met instantaneously by infinite intelligence, for I'm one with God, and God is everything. So think about that voice coming in versus the one that says, hey, you got this bill due. You can't go on this trip. You have this obligation. And what if this doesn't go well? Well, instead, I just drown it out. So the feeling in my body literally changes in just a few moments of these incantations, right? And if there's other people around, I do it in my head. If I'm by myself, I do it out loud in such a way that my internal vibrational state changes. And then all of my perceptual filters, the way I see the world, the things I resonate with, and most importantly, what I attract into my life changes in just a few moments of managing this internal voice and this internal dialogue. I was on a call there's a group of 6 of us that are this kind of our mastermind group, and we're all really good friends. We've been doing personal development for a long time, very intensely so. Between us, we have some pretty good coaching, and one of us was on saying how he was stressed and how he was making up these stories in his head. And so I just reminded him to change the internal voice, and he did. And within a few moments, like his physiology changed, his state changed. And he said, oh, I was stressed. And now I feel like I'm going to get this stuff done. And I'm like, yeah, of course. Because when you change the internal dialogue, the situation changes because your capabilities change. All right. The next thing, number 3. So number 1 was to change the other variables like our body. Diet is a huge one. If you guys haven't, go to the Spone Trained, get free access from sponetrained.com into the members area and see, I have a printout of the antenna theory graphic. You guys should put that on your refrigerator to be aware of what to manage in your emotions. So number 1 is to change the other variables. Number 2 is to do incantations, constantly drowning out that limiting voice. Number 3, again, is to go into silence and meditation and become the observer of that voice. And the more you let that voice just kind of run its course, the more energy it loses. So as you become centered, as you become still, as you become peaceful, it's almost like you're letting any of the electrical disturbances out of that antenna so you can get a clear signal, right? So if you have emotions trapped into your system, by meditating, you get that energy out. You can observe those thoughts. You can let them go. You can clear up that limiting voice, because that's where that limiting voice comes from, is energy in your antenna. That's fear-based energy. So by letting that go, you reset your system. You're going to be much more able to access those stations, if you will, of empowering thoughts. And number 4 goes right along with that, which is to get trapped emotions out. So I've been doing some work with my pendulum and the emotion code, which is an amazing book if you guys haven't checked that out. But basically just releasing trapped emotions. So if you have a trapped emotion of fear in your system, it's like that fear is going to keep you anchored to a radio station that doesn't serve you. So you have to constantly be clearing energy out of your system. And then that internal voice won't show up. So again, 4 ways to overcome that limiting voice is to change the other variables like our body language, to change, to do incantations and affirmations, constantly be drowning out that voice to make you feel empowered. Number 3 is to go into silence and meditate and find stillness, practice going into that place where that voice doesn't exist. And then 4 is to get any trapped emotions out of your system, and your internal dialogue will change. And when your internal dialogue changes, your capabilities change and your entire life will change. All right. So if you guys enjoyed this episode, I would love a review on iTunes. Remember to go check out that internal voice reframe meditation that I have on YouTube. It's also in the Hacking NLP course. So I have it free on YouTube, but it's really part of the NLP course. If you guys are interested in the Hacking NLP or Hacking Body Language or 30 days of influential language hacks, go to sponetrained.com and scroll down to the products and you'll see that there. And the 30 days of influential language hacks is a lot of patterns of how to change the internal voice. A simple shift like changing, if I accomplish this to when I accomplish this. Simple little shifts like that will change your internal state and will change your capabilities. This is why language is so important. As a hypnotist, we study language. And so the power of words, when we speak, we create. Abracadabra means with these words, I create. So everything that you say, everything that you think creates a process that's creating, that's attracting to you. So you have to be very aware, constantly be diligent, be observing your thoughts, be observing your language. And those are some of the tools on how to do that. All right. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Again, this one I stream live on Facebook. Maybe I'll do that more often. So check out my Facebook pages. And then next episode, we're going to talk about when you shift this voice, sometimes we don't always feel the energy shift. Sometimes, we feel that anxiety and we try to talk ourselves out of it and it doesn't shift. And I'm going to tell you on the next episode why that happens and how to overcome it. So you're definitely going to want to check that one out. I got a few episodes that I'm about to release that I'm really excited about, some really unique ways of connecting with our with our higher selves, shifting our emotions, and getting in touch with who we really are. So thanks for joining me today, and I look forward to talking to you on the next episode.